Hey, good morning, everybody. As you can tell, this is not the Guru of Geek, Marlo. Did you figure that one out, Jim?
Yeah.
It had anything to do with my face or my hair?
A little bit of everything.
Well, guys, I'm back filling in to this segment of the Tech Ranch, and we're definitely going to have an interesting morning here. I've got a call-in guest that'll be calling in here, the second segment of the show. But it's amazing how weather in North Dakota always changes. And yesterday, almost hitting 50, and now today the winds are back and cold out there. But it's great to be back here. I was in Minnesota this weekend visiting my daughter-in-law and my grandson, and had my other grandson with me. And I'll tell you what, we talk about technology. I was at a movie theater in St. Cloud. We watched the movie Wonder. Awesome movie. Jim, have you seen that one yet? No. Oh, you got to go see it. It's incredible. But we're actually in a movie theater with reclining chairs, and you can order pizza and popcorn and adult beverages from your chair, and they deliver it to you. So, but anyway, we had and the sound effects were incredible in this movie theater. So maybe that'll be a segment we can talk about in the future, and that is about movies and what's happening with automation and just the sound effects and all of that to make the movies. But I wanted to mention today is National App Day, and one of the things that I think is important that we sometimes forget about is how much we rely on those apps, whether they're on our phone or whether they're on our computer. And I was just looking at my phone this morning and looking at all the apps that I have. Jim can't look at his phone this morning because he misplaced it. Well, I think he knows where it's at. It's at Marlo's office. So, and how did you really survive without the phone this weekend?
I borrowed my wife's phone.
Oh, and how did that go? No, I bet not. I think we've all been in that situation where we misplace our phone or whatever. But I'll tell you what, sometimes it's nice to have that peace of quiet too, that you don't have to deal with that phone ringing all the time. Well, I was looking at the apps, and I was just kind of picking out a few that I have on my phone. And I got Yelp, which is an app for looking at for restaurants, and there's so many different ones out there right now. But I think everybody picks out their favorite ones that they can go to. I have one that I use quite a bit, and that's my Bible app. So in case I don't have my Bible with me, I have it there. And some of you might appreciate this or not, but I'm one of these guys that when I'm in a motel room or I'm staying at somebody else's house, and if I don't have noise, I can't sleep. And so I have a bedtime fan app that I use quite a bit. The other thing that I was just kind of looking back at is some of the newer apps that are out there. Obviously, when we travel a lot, we have different apps we use for Travelocity and Google Maps. Man, I'll tell you what, I just I have to have that so I know where I'm going. And unfortunately, this weekend I'm I'm visiting my daughter-in-law, and I take a different route, and I kind of get lost. And as men, we don't like to admit that we get lost. So anyway, I'm on my Google Maps, and I'm asking where I need to go. And the ironic thing is that there's two towns that are very close in name. One of them is called Cottonwood, and the other one is called Cotton Lane. So I got mixed up there. And then I also got mixed up with the towns that are close by, Clearwater and Clear Lake. So when I had put in my address to go to Clearwater, it took me there, which was about 10 miles out of where I wanted to go, which was Clear Lake, Minnesota. So sometimes we have to be careful of how we speak into our phone and making sure that we give them the right information. Otherwise, they'll send you to Clearwater instead of Clear Lake. You know, I don't get into the video side of things as much until I was this weekend when I was visiting my daughter-in-law, and they have all of their TV programming. They have Hulu and Netflix and Sling and Wii. So I got to experiment a little bit with what was going on there, so I could kind of download some of the either the TV shows or the movie shows that I wanted to watch. But I'll tell you, when we get to a point where we're so dependent on apps, and what happens when we lose a signal, which happens quite a bit, and now we're caught without our apps. Oh man. The big craze that I think a lot of us have seen out there are these health and fitness apps. Fitbit. In fact, I had a Fitbit watch, and I was referring to it quite a bit, give you a heart rate and how many steps I took that day. And I don't know, it broke on me, and I haven't had a chance to get it fixed. In fact, I'll have to come clean. It was actually my grandson's Fitbit, and I asked him if I could use it, and pretty soon I was using it every day. So that might be a Christmas present for everybody that's listening that wants to send Rockin Dave Blair a present for Christmas. You know, we look at maps and what they mean to us, and how much we definitely get caught up in that whole realm of whether it's on the computer or not. But one of the things I was reading just today was about Apple, and Apple is ready to ditch the Mac. And it's interesting article that we'll have to keep on top of to find out what the heck Apple's plans are in the future. But stay tuned. I got a special guest friend of mine named Scott Fischer that's going to be talking a little bit about his background, and it's called grounding. So be prepared.
Right now, 38.
The Red River Farm Network. Ag News is here on SuperTalk 1270.
Hey, we're back again. I didn't even introduce myself. What happened? Jim, you were supposed to kind of clue me in on that.
Oh,
Rockin Dave,
yeah.
You know? Well, anyway, Rockin Dave is back, and hey, very excited to talk a little bit about two things that I think I'm just always amazed at how people that I run into and their backgrounds, and I'm kind of a nosy guy, so I get to find out a lot about them. And about 6 months ago, I was at a energy show. In fact, I had a booth there, and guy came up to me and introduced himself as Scott Fischer, and boy, I'll tell you what, it wasn't too long before we kind of hit it off, and we become really, really super close friends. And I wanted Scott to be on the program. In fact, I invited him to be live, but something had come up, and he had a few emergencies he needed to take care of on the road, so he's calling in today. So I'd like to introduce you to Scott Fischer with Sustainable Grounding Systems, and we'll talk about that kind of in the third segment, but I want Scott to segue in here a little bit about himself and his famous dad. So, Scott, thanks for joining us this morning.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be on the phone, and sorry I can't be there in person. I'll give you a little bit of background. I was kind of raised indirectly in the space industry. My father was the inventor of the pressurized pen, also known as the Fischer space pen, that was used on both all the Apollo and Soyuz flights. And other than that, being trained, I went to apprentice school and did my tool and die apprenticeship in Europe, and somehow got involved indirectly because of the space organization after seeing several space launches and seeing what happens when systems don't go right and launches are postponed. I got involved in electrical grounding, and I've been doing that for many years, and basically minimizing disruption and explosion, trying to prevent explosions by dissipating stray current, things of that nature.
You know, Scott, one of the things that was kind of ironic when we first met was I wanted to get a business card from you, and we walked out to your van where you have your traveling equipment that you use for doing a lot of your tests and stuff across the United States, and I pulled out my space pen that I had gotten probably 25, 30 years ago from my boss, and I was writing a note, and Scott looks at me and he's going, "Space pen, wow, cool," and and I'm going, "Well, how did you know that?" And then he got into the story about his dad inventing this pen, and and from there. We've been just, I call him the well-grounded guy, but he's also the space pen guy as well, although your brother's kind of taken over that business, correct?
Yes, he has. Gary Fischer and my nephew, Matthew Fischer.
And you had a really unique experience, and we'll stay on this topic for a little bit here about your dad's connections with all of the astronauts, and it was amazing hearing some of the stories about growing up in a household where your dad was connected with all of the astronauts. Can you give us just a snapshot of that, because I think it's pretty cool.
Oh, just it was kind of neat. Many of the astronauts have been over to our house. In fact, there's pictures with me, with Neil Armstrong, and many of the astronauts throughout the years, and been to NASA many times, and just always been had space in my heart.
The other thing that was interesting is that, your dad wanted to make sure that the astronauts had something to use, because ballpoint pens did not work in space, correct?
Correct. In a zero-gravity environment, our standard pens today use gravity for the ink to flow to the tip, and so by designing the pressurized refill, allow that constant pressure on the ball and the ball actually works as basically a ball valve. So when there's pressure pushed on the ball, it actually releases the ink and rolls onto the paper.
Well, I think that I mentioned to you, well, then why didn't they use pencils? Well, and I found this kind of unique too. Why didn't they use pencils up there, Scott?
Yeah, you got a lot of sensitive electronics, and lead's not necessarily a good combination, especially those fragments can break off and short out electrical systems.
Which is probably not a good thing when you're that far out in space and having any electrical problems. And Scott can definitely relate to that. And in our third segment about how important it is to have the grounding available for all the different types of technologies that are out there. But one of the other key things was that his dad made sure that the Fischer space pens were offered to cosmonauts as well. And you had a chance to go over to Russia, I think, and accept I think it was an award on behalf of the space program in Russia as well, or Soviet Union, I guess, at that time.
Yes. In fact, it's interesting. Back in one of the earlier flights called the Apollo-Soyuz mission, actually Tom Stafford flew in the American capsule, and Alexei Leonov flew in the Russian, and they met up in space. And every time there's a Russian astronaut flown, they plant a tree in Russia. And Alexei brought seeds up, and Tom Stafford brought a space pen, and they actually exchanged these items in space the first time on I think it was primarily a mission of peace, and it was quite an exciting. That was one of my favorite missions.
You know, it's interesting that we'll talk a little bit even about NASA coming up in this third segment as well, but how much both the programs, the space program NASA has and the cosmonaut space program, how they really don't let government get too engaged. They kind of have their own bonding relationship with each other. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it is. From what I've experienced, politics, as far as when it gets down to the missions and the stuff that I've seen, has been always out of it. Obviously, both countries have political environments that are different, but it seems when it comes to space, they've always been very mutually got along, and it was very interesting.
Well, one of there was a lady, Melissa Lewis, I believe, or Lucas, that was here about a month and a half ago. Marlo brought her in as a guest, and she does a lot of education programs for schools, and she was here for a conference called Disrupt Well that we talked about in the past, and it was amazing what her background is trying to engage kids early on into the space program, and actually introducing them to experiments that they could take up into space at the space station. And she's going to be coming back here to North Dakota, and we're excited to get her back on. But it's just amazing what space is all about, but more importantly, what kind of experiments and the things that they're doing here. And we'll talk a little bit about some opportunities even here in North Dakota in the very near future of how do we get involved. And we'll be back with Scott Fischer from Sustainable Grounding Systems, and he's going to talk us a little bit about that. So stay tuned. Hey, Rockin Dave Blair back here, just winding down here. We got 2 more segments left, but we're joined by Scott Fischer. I would consider becoming a really good friend of mine, and I hope he feels the same way. Wanted to have Scott in studios, but like I said, he's out traveling right now, taking care of problems, and that's I guess you're the problem solver when it comes to sustainable grounding systems. And maybe our audience needs to have a better idea of what that really means. So Scott, could you kind of give them an overview of that, and then maybe you can talk about some of the problems and issues you've had, how important it is to make sure our systems are well grounded out there.
Gotcha. It would be a pleasure to do so. Give you just the audience a little bit of background. I'm sure most of the audience is very familiar with typical ground rods or grounding for everything from your house to satellite dishes, things of that nature. What happens is the grounding is very crucial in creating a baseline, and so on your electrical systems, in most cases, they'll install what's called a standard ground rod. But what happens is that ground rod has connectivity with the soil, and soil can vary, especially in concentrated environments where it gets cold, where you get cryogenic or frozen soil. You lose that connectivity, and when you start to lose that connectivity, everything from static on your phone lines to when you get into more serious problems in manufacturing, it can cause disruption in automation. And if there's stray currents or other influences that are causing stray current to attach itself to the ground, when that grounding varies because of the inconsistence of connectivity with soil, it starts to choose other paths. And when it chooses other paths, it causes a lot of havoc. So I've been working with a company called Linkhole Engineering that's actually the inventor of what's called an XIT ground system. The XIT is a specialized grounding system where you actually drill, depending on the soil. In fact, from what I understand, they just drilled a 200-foot ground rod in Panama for the canals. So it's because of the very sandy condition and dry climate where it was just not creating enough connectivity with soil, and they were having a lot of issues. So grounding can pretty much affect everything from aerospace to residence, communications, power plants. In fact, I'm at a power plant currently now investigating the deterioration of grounding systems after 10 years of some of the newer plants that have been built, and we're doing an evaluation on that.
Well, I know you've spent some time up here in North Dakota too, and part of the issues that have happened, whether it's a power plant or an ethanol plant, is also the oil and gas industry, pipelines, and making sure that their systems are well grounded. Maybe you can just give us an example. A lot of people are familiar with what's going on here in North Dakota with the Bakken, but especially when it comes to all the pipelines and making sure they're not disrupted. And maybe you can just give us an example of some of the things you've run into here in North Dakota as well.
Yeah, pipeline's kind of an interesting scenario there. They have a system that they use. It's called cathodic protection to prevent corrosion of the pipes, which in many cases, cathodic protection actually doesn't induce negative current on the pipeline, which prevents what they call corrosion cells from developing. When that system is too close to a grounding system, they actually can influence each other, where electrical grounding can be influenced from the electrical side and cause the corrosion to accelerate, or vice versa. The corrosion side can actually induce itself onto the electric side and cause automation disruptions or electronic disruptions. Some of the other issues that we're finding is a lot of the newer equipment were variable frequency drives. These are systems that actually allow motors to run at variable speeds, and this variable frequency drive equipment actually induces a lot of current that goes stray. And what we try to do is track that stray current and redirect it to the ground system so that it doesn't feed back into automation equipment, which causes communication problems and things of that nature. And we've been running a lot into that. Additionally, with lightning protection, we're finding that a lot of lightning protection systems are actually not bonded or connected to the rest of the grounding system. And if they're in place or too close, they can actually create a ground loop. And they cause other influences as well. So it starts to get pretty complicated with the different all the different elements and things that are going on, and it all we start basically as I mentioned earlier, Lincoln Engineering. They're quite a sophisticated engineering company that specializes in grounding, and it all starts with the connectivity of the soil, and we try to work from the soil upwards, and everything from soil resistivity testing, which is funny because it's very similar to what they use to find oil. They use electric log resistivity testing to locate oil, but we use it actually to evaluate the soil condition and its connectivity and its ability to distribute and dissipate electrical current.
Well, what's interesting too, and we've talked about this a few times, is that when there's issues, they call you up and saying, "Hey, we've got something going on here." But to handle that stuff early on would be to get you involved with a design, whether it's a new pipeline or a power plant, or one of the other big areas in communications are the data centers. But, to get somebody like you engaged early on so they don't have this problem with disruptive power going somewhere and nobody knows where it's at.
Yeah, the earlier we get involved, the better. Although we've become, by default, experts at troubleshooting these problems by tracking them and finding out. I've been, on my own time, I do a lot of research on, for instance, this power plant I'm at now is actually evaluating the grounding system after the plant has been in operation for 10 years, because initially the plant could be designed perfect, but we find out after so many years, the copper in the ground and other things, depending on the soil and content, it can cause premature corroding, or if there's current being discharged on the grounding system, it can also cause premature dissipation of the copper and causes the grounding system to no longer do what it's supposed to do.
Scott, are you finding other areas of the country that have more issues than certain areas, or is it kind of just all across the board when it comes to those situations?
It's interesting. We've done a lot of work in dry climates in Arizona and Nevada, and that has its own inherent problems. I love North Dakota. I've been up there now for about 7 years, and the issues that are caused by the freezing of the soil is interesting, because in most cases that's never been taken into account in the grounding design, and they just it's just been overlooked from what I see. So I've been fascinated in trying to come up with ways, and working with Lincoln to come up with ways to fix that problem. As systems are being installed and then they're growing and expanding, all of a sudden their grounding becomes completely inadequate. Not that it was adequate to begin with because of the frozen soil. So we've found ways that we can actually take a system, and rather than redigging and putting in a whole new grounding system, we found using the XITs that we can actually bond and attach, after doing a survey and installing these, we can update the grounding system at minimum cost to some of these facilities. And it's just been a really interesting environment up there in North Dakota with the kind of problems that happen just from the different climate changes.
One thing, and maybe we could touch on that in the last segment, is, grounding systems, and in regards to a spaceship, or now with all of the drones that are flying around, and how do you protect them? Whether it's a lightning strike or whatever. And I think that could be interesting in topic in itself. And we also wanted to let Scott talk a little bit about kind of an idea he has with some other of his colleagues out there of maybe using in North Dakota for some testing of what the future is looking like in our venture to Mars. And we talk about flying cars, and we talk about all the autonomous vehicles. I've been on this show a few times talking about the autonomous friendly corridor, but we're moving in on a trip to on a trip to Mars, and I think that that's going to be interesting, and how NASA and everybody are preparing to look at that. So stay tuned for a little bit more on the grounding and how that affects all of us out there, and in store for what could be coming in regards to habitat for Mars. So this is Rockin Dave Blair, and we'll be back shortly.
Right now, 38.
Dave Ramsey is heard here. SuperTalk 1270.
Hey, Rockin Dave Blair back here for our last segment. Always goes by fast, but I think it's been an interesting conversation with Scott Fischer on sustainable grounding systems, and how important it is to make sure that well protected. In fact, it was funny. I had a hot tub installed here about 5 months ago, and there was this grounding wire, and I talked to my electrician. I said, well, we need to have this grounded. And he's going, well, I really don't ground a lot of hot tubs. And I'm going, well, yeah, that's because you're probably not in the hot tub. So Scott says, well, I think it would be important we have this grounded. So anyway, I talked to the electrician, and I said, no, I want my hot tub grounded. So and I've taken some, and I've felt safe, I guess, in my well-grounded hot tub. So, Scott, one of the things that I wanted to just bring up was, how do astronauts, especially the space shuttle or in space ships that are launched, protect themselves from any electrical straight current, so it doesn't disrupt their systems? The same way with drones. Can you kind of give us a little comment on that?
Well, the actual spaceships, that are in space, I don't have any experience on, but I do have interesting experience. I actually had the opportunity to build a Mars habitat for the Mars Society. We did a big study on grounding and the effects of the environment that can actually cause static straight current that can be produced by the environment. Basically, just by sand blowing in the air can create a very high static environment, and this has to be dissipated, and can cause, if it isn't, it can cause havoc to the sensitive electronics inside the facility. So we actually had a chance to do this Mars habitat in Nevada. It was actually a partnership with the Nevada University of Las Vegas, and excuse me a second. Yeah, I'll be right with you. And that was actually built on the UNLV campus, and then shipped to Kennedy Space Center, where it was exhibited for several months, and then moved to Hanksville, Utah, where they actually been using it to do astronaut studies for long stays, within a confined space and so forth. Mars Society to this day is still actually using that facility in Hanksville, and they're looking to build a new one. So we're kind of kicking around the idea of maybe building one there in North Dakota.
Well, it's kind of interesting because we talk about Mars like, it's just around the corner. But, one of the things that I think scientists are really trying to understand, same way when we first went to the moon, is, what does that environment look like? What kind of conditions are on there? The issue that always seems to come up when we're looking at going to Mars, because it is probably as closely related to Earth as any of the planets, is the habitat up there, and what does that mean? Can we grow something up there so sustainable? And it's funny because there's a lot of astronauts that are now starting to opening up their own new businesses when it comes to research and development. But this habitat society they're talking about here, how do you see that? How do you see that working in North Dakota?
Well, we've had just some brief discussions of maybe teaming up with one of the universities in North Dakota and the Mars Society and developing some inexpensive way to produce a habitat that can actually be produced and built on a terrestrial surface such as Mars, and using the elements there on Mars. And there has been some studies actually in Australia where they found some area of Australia, and I don't know exactly where the location is, where they found material that's very similar to what's on Mars. So there was conversations with Dr. Zubrin, Robert Zubrin, is president of the Mars Society, about possibly developing one of these units in North Dakota and then actually replicating it in Australia as well. And it's quite an interesting program. They've been running astronauts, and I don't know the quantity, but I think they've had over 4,000 participants at that facility that we built several years back, I think in 2001. I think it could be a great opportunity in North Dakota, and I think some of the technology that could be derived from the various public-private partnerships and developing it would be very exciting. And of course, I'd be very excited to participate on the grounding side and see what we can do to minimize any disruptions and things that can create problems up there.
This article I was reading this morning about former astronauts opt for space-related jobs. I mean, you can't even imagine all the new opportunities that are in front of us when it comes to space exploration and trying to come up with ideas and trying to overcome the challenges that come with going to outer space and then going, to a planet like Mars. So I think there are going to be some really interesting jobs and new technologies that are going to be related to that. And I think you hit it on nail on the head too when it comes to getting universities engaged in this, and some of these students out there that are looking at different careers, both as it comes to becoming a scientist or an engineer. But we've talked about the importance of what you're doing on the grounding side of things, and there really isn't any programs out there other than the one that you're affiliated with in California that teaches students about this whole issue with grounding. And we've had some discussions with our university system here and also with the University of Mary and their engineering program, and how we could set up a program to talk a little bit, and then more importantly is to develop some curriculum for grounding. Any little comments on that, Scott, as well?
No, I think that would be very good. And I mean, grounding touches so many environments, even grain elevators. It's very, very critical because the static that can be generated on those high surface areas just caused by sand blowing and particulates blowing in the air just can create a lot of havoc. And especially as the newer systems are being installed and they're going to more automation, there's a lot more issues that are being caused. Of course, also the lightning protection aspect, and having grain elevators that use pneumatic flows to move material, which can create a very combustible environment. And these are all things that are these kind of environments are going to be very customary in space as we go on. But so it's very fascinating in trying to tackle all these different industries, even the medical side of grounding with MRIs and that equipment that the troubleshooting that has to be established and performed to minimize other disruptions when hospitals are installing new MRI equipment.
Well, I think this has been a really interesting topic in reference to all of the technologies and all the equipment and everything that we take for granted, and that if something we have some stray current, what happens, and you have that disruption, and you might lose a whole system. And Scott's definitely knowledgeable on this. Scott, I want to just change topic real quick since this is National App Day. So how many apps do you have on your phone?
I haven't counted.
So which ones do you think you use the most?
Oh, primarily my email app and a couple phone apps. I don't know.
It's interesting because we all get caught up into using our phones so much, and what's that going to look like in the future? And like I'd mentioned when I started the program, what's Mac going to do? They said the computers are going to be history, and we'll be using more and more of our phones and these mini iPads, I guess. So, hey, that'll be a topic for another day. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Scott, for joining our show this morning, the Tech Ranch. The Guru Geek will be back, maybe. We don't know. He seems to be gone, and then he's here again. Like, where's Waldo? But Rockin Dave Blair saying thank you. Hope everybody has a blessed week.